So yesterday I showed you that video, right? Where a single cell becomes a human being. So at the moment of conception, you have 24,000 genes about. And they're half from your mother, half from your father. What is a gene? A gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for a protein. So those are the building blocks of our body, because proteins are also enzymes, and enzymes can convert proteins into carbohydrates, fats, etc. So that's how it all starts. 23,000 genes that ultimately end up as a human body. As I mentioned, a gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for one protein. So it's a unit of what we call heredity. Okay? A gene is a unit of heredity. Think of genes like words and DNA as letters. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And there are 4 chemical bases that make up DNA. You don't have to remember all this, I just have to share it with you anyway. So these 4 chemical bases are called adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, ATCG if you want to shorten. So ATCG is the alphabet of life. And that includes everything that we call life, biological organisms. From a primate, a monkey, to a banana, to a human being. Only 4 letters. You know, English is a little more complicated. We have 26 letters, I believe. But life is only 4 letters. All of life. You share about 65% of your genes with the banana. And 80% of your genes with a mouse. 70% of your genes are the same as in a fruit fly. And 99%, actually 98 point something percent, almost 99% of the genes are the same as a chimpanzee. Very little difference between your genes, my genes, and a monkey. Very less than 2%. So there's a unity of life as we go back to the first life forms that, according to modern biological evolutionary constructs, evolved about 2.8 billion years ago. The first organisms were called chemolitho-autotrophic hyperthermophiles. And they were little chemical-like organisms. Chemo means chemical, litho, lived on rocks. Autotrophic, they knew how to reproduce. Hyperthermophiles, they lived on the rims of volcanoes. So all of us come from that. It's very interesting. There's a continuity of life without a single break in the chain. This is the biological evolutionary construct, okay? Is it true? It's true for the construct that it is, that works. To do science, we need constructs. So, but there's an unbroken chain of life going back 3 billion years. The planet is supposed to be 4.5 billion years, and the universe is 13.8 billion years. As I said, there are only 4 letters that make life. The letters themselves are made of chemicals, of course, and the chemicals are made of atoms, of elements. And the 4 most prominent atoms in a body are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. This is 96% of your body. Then you add 2 more, sulfur and phosphorus, that's 98% of your body. And the rest of the periodic table, if you ever learned that in school, contributes another 2% to your body. Where did these elements come from, according to the scientific construct? Well, the hydrogen and helium could have gone back to the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years. But the others, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, and everything else, were manufactured in the cauldron of burning stars. So as stars exploded and burnt themselves into the heat death of absolute zero, some of them, then hydrogen and helium fused to become the other elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, which are now in your body. So when we say we are stardust beings, I'm not being metaphorical, being very literal. The oxygen going to your brain right now comes from some galaxy. And the carbon in your fingernails comes from probably another galaxy. And I mentioned yesterday that some time ago, that according to current cosmology, there are 2 trillion galaxies. So your body is actually made by the entire universe. It takes the entire universe to make you. And I think the best definition of a human being is we are stardust beings with self-awareness. Fantastic, absolutely. So we shouldn't mind little things if you look at yourself from this perspective, that you came from the stars. And that's what you are right now in this body. During the 9 months that I showed you the whole process of morphogenesis and differentiation, during those 9 months, your what's the word I want to use? Your journey in those 9 months, it remembers all of evolution. So first you literally look like a microbe, and then you look like everything that we call life on this planet. You look like a reptile, you look like a mammal, you look like a primate, a monkey, and finally a human being. So when people, evolutionary biologists, talk about this, phylogeny and ontogeny mirror each other. Phylogeny is our appearance, ontogeny is the original source. Ontogeny is the nature of being. So all of evolution is remembered. And we have 3 brains as a result of this. The first is called the Reptilian Brain. The second is called the Limbic or Mammalian Brain. And the third is the Cortical Brain. Okay, so if you look at a brain from the side, it looks somewhat like this. This would be what is called a handy model of the brain. Okay. The reptilian brain is the base of my thumb would be where the reptilian brain is. The reptilian brain is 300 million years old in evolution. And it's also called the midbrain. And when you go next to a reptile and you make a sudden noise or a sudden movement, the reptile will attack you if you're close by. If you're a little further away, it will slither away. Okay, so this is called the startle response. In us, the startle response is the fight or flight or the freeze response, which is the origin of stress. Okay, stress is a fight or flight response. When we're threatened, we either attack Right now the whole world is in this, by the way. Brexit and, the wall from US to Mexico and all that's going on in the world. It's fight or flight response, right? Scared. Reptilian response. All our political leaders are sophisticated reptilian responses. All of them. So that's why we are a mess. 300 million years. When I was in medical school, the way we remembered the functions of the reptilian brain were the 4 F's: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Okay. So we can also say that the midbrain is responsible for survival. Okay, without the midbrain, we wouldn't be here. But of course, if it's dysfunctional, then we risk our survival too. Stress is the #1 epidemic of our civilization. Everything that you see out there, today is a result of stress. Not just within you, your family, communities, nations. It's the #1 epidemic of our civilization. And what scientists are finding out now is that the #1 marker of stress in your body is inflammation. Okay, so what about inflammation? By the way, I have 2 articles on inflammation. One is last week's San Francisco Chronicle. So if you go SF Gate, San Francisco Chronicle, and just type out my name, inflammation, and they're written they're co-authored by scientists from Karolinska Institute, where they give the Nobel Prizes. And then next week there's another one. You can also find the same article on Huffington Post and on LinkedIn. So just if you type my name, inflammation, or Karolinska Institute, Chopra Foundation, you'll find them. And then I'm writing one today for next week, which also has Rudy as the author. So it tells you all about inflammation, which I think you should know about it. Okay, because if we take care of inflammation, we take care of almost every disease, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. Inflammation is the underlying factor in almost every disease. Only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant, which means they predict the disease. The other gene mutations, mutation means errors. So if you think of gene as a word, DNA as the letter, then a mutation is like a spelling mistake. It's a typo. So it prints out the wrong protein, and that then leads to disease. But only 5% of those are fully penetrant, which means they can't be prevented. We'll find the cure, scientists will find the cure for that too, by looking at the exact mistake and correcting the typo. As you know, these days people are talking about gene editing and CRISPR and all of that. But 95% of those mutations that cause disease are actually don't guarantee the disease. You can prevent it. You might even be able to reverse it if you can reverse the inflammation. And so in all these diseases, inflammation is the underlying factor, and inflammation is linked to this inappropriate fight-flight that we call stress. Okay, the second part of the brain that we evolve during our journey in the womb is called the limbic or mammalian brain. So if I open my hand, you'll see this where my thumb is, that's the limbic brain. It's also called the emotional brain. Okay. This brain is not found in reptiles. So reptiles may have an emotional life. There's some evidence that they do, but they don't have the elaborate emotional life that mammals have. So mammals are so called because of the word mama, which means breast, mammary. So unlike reptiles, mammals don't lay eggs, they make babies, and they also breastfeed. They also have emotional interactions with their babies and with their loved ones. We can say they form close-knit groups that when they nurture each other. That's what a family is. So mammals move and have bonds with close-knit emotional linkages between individuals, a father, mother, children, etc. And then, of course, society. But that's the unit, the family. And families bond through emotions. So when a baby is very young, let's say an infant, then the baby, before it learns language, before it learns how to speak, language, as I told you, creates constructs. But before we create constructs of experience, we learn emotional language. So just like we don't remember when we learned English, no one here remembers how they learned English, but you did. Otherwise, you wouldn't be speaking it, or whatever language you speak. You don't remember it, but you did learn it. So too, our emotional skills, we don't remember when we learned them, but we learned them even before we learned proper language, or what we call this language. So what does a baby do when it's very much of an infant, less than 1 year? It looks at whoever the caregiver is. And in most cases, that's the mother, because the mother is breastfeeding, etc., etc. And mother is also very close in terms of touching and all the things that go along with nurturing, kissing and hugging and cuddling and cooing. And the baby is looking for that and looks at the mother's eyes first. And what is it trying to guess? Is she happy? Is she unhappy? Okay, and what it's trying to guess is for its own sake. If she's happy, it feels safe. Okay, and then it also looks at facial expressions. Is she smiling? Is she upset? It looks or it pays attention to the tone of her voice. Is it friendly, or is she upset? Is she angry? It also looks at body language in general, gestures. And then it tunes into those. And what does that? The limbic brain. So this phenomenon is called limbic resonance. The baby's limbic brain resonates with the mother's limbic brain. Mostly mother, but other people too, right? In the environment. And so the baby's emotional makeup or emotional vocabulary, if you want to say, is a result of this phenomenon that some scientists call limbic resonance. If the caregiver, mother, has been abused, is subject to stress, then all of that will be mirrored in the baby. And by 3 or 4 years, that's pretty much set. And by 8 years, it's almost all set. So your emotional life today is influenced by things that happened in the first 3 years of your life. And by 8 years, it was complete. Which in a way, the first response you say is, then I'm screwed. Okay, I had nothing to do with it, right? And that's true, you've had nothing to do with it. But you can change that. And that's what neuroplasticity is all about. That's what we're going to be doing here, or we are doing here. We're changing the way we experience life, experience ourselves, and hopefully even experience our emotions. I should do a session on emotions. Remind me, we have 3 or 4 sessions, so one we should do on emotions. maybe even this afternoon. Okay, let's do that. Okay. So we can correct that. If we are unhappy, we can correct that. We're emotionally distressed, we can correct that. This is the emotional brain. And then this is 100 million years old. Okay, the first one is 300 million years old. The second, in evolution, the second is 100 million. And then the bulk of our brain is this cortical brain, which is only 4 million years old. So the cortical brain is also referred to as the intellectual brain, but this is where we experience, or through which we experience, I shouldn't say where we experience, through which we experience everything that we call intellectual activity, but also, the sense of wonder that human beings have, curiosity, insight, introspection, intuition, creativity, higher consciousness, all of that. You need your cortical brain to express that. 4 million years old, but it grew explosively in human beings in the last 15, 20,000 years or so. Remember I shared with you that we started telling stories. So when we started telling stories, this brain grew. Okay, and in the first there was only oral language, about 20, 30,000 years. And then there was written language. Written language is only 5,000 years. So look at the scale, 13.8 billion years. Written language is only 5,000. But with written language came everything. Came art and music and science and literature. There was some of that before that. But in the way we talk about modern civilization, it's 5,000 years. Everything that we call civilization, all these constructs, this everything, BAM, whatever you can name and describe, is our knowledge of that and our creativity of that. We created most of what we experience, right? You said, did we create the stars and the moon? And as constructs, we did. We created the whole universe as a construct, but construct means the ability to describe it and to create a map of it and then navigate that and change our experiences. We created the whole thing, human beings, and most of it is 5,000 years. But when we look at this huge evolution, you can also say that most human beings are under the influence of their reptilian and emotional brains, not their intellectual brains. Why? Because these are more primitive emotions. More primitive or older ways of navigating experience. And, if the cortical brain is only 4 million and only grew explosively 15,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, then we are ruled by the more older brains. That's why the world is a mess. People pretend to be rational, but they are bristling with emotions, and emotions will override your intellect. Anytime your emotions, you can be the smartest person in the world, but emotions will override your intellect. That's why we need to understand emotions. Okay, so these three brains develop in utero, in our intrauterine life, but then as we, of course, have experience, everything modulates that too. These are three different brains. Ideally, they should be all integrated, but they're not. In most human beings, they're not. Okay, so as you grow ready to emerge into the world, 9 months, and now the baby starts to come out of the womb, there's something very interesting that happens that we only learnt about only in the last decade or so. And that is, as the baby comes out of the birth canal, assuming it's not a cesarean section, and I can talk about that too. But when the baby comes out of the birth canal, it swallows, it inhales, and it is covered by all the vaginal secretions of its mother. And this results in the second genome. It's an inoculation of the second genome. And that second genome is called the microbiome. It's all the bacteria in her vagina. And these bacteria contribute another 2.2 million genes to the human being at that moment. So you have 23,000 human genes, you have 2.2 million bacterial genes. So technically speaking, you're a bacterial colony holding on to a few. You're a bacterial colony, and a few human genes are hanging on to it. You know, you're mostly bacteria in terms of genes. So I was talking about cesarean section. What these days when people do cesarean sections, which should be avoided in general, because most cesarean sections are done on weekdays, never on weekends. Doctors have to play golf on weekends, and they're done mostly for the convenience of the doctor. But if they are done these days, the obstetrician should theoretically take the secretions of the mother and give the baby a massage with all her secretions, and then also put some in the mouth, in the nose, so the baby can inhale them and also swallow them. The lungs are covered by, inoculated by these bacteria. They're very important for our life. Well, then something happens. The baby is born now, and then of course there's further interaction between mother, baby, father, everybody, brothers, sisters, if they happen to be. They all contribute their genes to the baby. How? Through just touching and interaction. Mother mostly because she's breastfeeding, and kissing, exchanging saliva, etc., etc. This is a very important period, early development, where the mother's basically state of health influences the baby's health. And it's very genetic. She's contributing genes. And so is now the father and other people. And by the way, in any interaction that we have, we also exchange genes. So this whole idea that, your genes that you got from your parents, that's not really true. We are constantly exchanging genes. Bacterial genes, but they do the same thing as human genes. They make proteins, and they make other products. And in fact, your bacterial genes interact with the human genes. That's why all this interest these days on probiotics and all of that, because the excessive use of antibiotics has eliminated 30% of the microbiome in Western civilization. If we want to do experiments on the original microbiome, which we do in our foundation along with University of California, actually we have to import poop from the Amazon. We have to look at what the bacterial colonies in the Amazon are doing, because we've destroyed 30%. And a lot of people say that almost every disease can be linked to dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means dysfunction of the genes. Anyway, so this now happens, and then of course here's something that Renee found from one of our archives. I show it. It's a very nice slide. So 90% of our body consists of bacterial genes. 10% is human. These bacteria go back to the beginning of life. We are an ecosystem of the earth, and ultimately, as I just explained to you, of the entire universe. The microbiome responds to everything: food, sleep, thoughts, emotions, stress levels, social interactions. Practices of meditation, yoga, breathing, exercise, healthy food, massage moves the body-mind away from inflammation in the direction of homeostasis and self-regulation. Most major diseases like diabetes, arthritis, asthma, actually many more, cardiovascular illness, autoimmune illnesses, have as a background inflammation at the cellular level. So these two articles that I mentioned, which are in the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, Huffington Post, and LinkedIn, one is already there, the next one, they are basically a summary of the state of knowledge we have about inflammation. If you want to read it, it's very simple, but my co-authors are people from Karolinska Institute, Harvard, etc. They're good people, and they all collaborated for this article. That's a beautiful slide, Renee. Where did you find it? You made it. Very good. Okay. Excellent. Now make sure those statistics are right, 10%, 90%. Okay, just go back. It's not a big deal. I mean, it may be, you know what people do, critics, they'll find some little thing and they'll say, gotcha. That's been my life. You know, they'll find some little thing. They gotcha. That's not true. So just look at those 90%, and that seems very accurate. Okay, so now let's talk about, you know, the reason we call the book Super Genes was, you know, your genetic makeup is not only the microbiome and the genes, but something else called the epigenome. So what's the epigenome? The epigenome is a sheath of proteins above the genes. That's why it's called the epigenome. And this is shaped by life experience. So whatever experiences the baby has creates the mental, emotional, perceptual, that results in this production by the genes and the microbiome of the epigenome, which then regulates the genes and the microbiome. So that's all kind of interconnected. They're all regulating each other. But this is our genetic makeup. It's not what we used to learn, but at least I learned in medical school. Okay. Okay, so your body is a dynamic activity of seeming non-change. Why do I say seeming non-change? Because from moment to moment it looks the same, but it's not. It's an activity, right? It's changing all the time in the midst of change. This dynamic activity of seeming non-change in the midst of change is called homeostasis, self-regulation. And these are the things that influence it. You know, our outer life, which is the experience of sound, touch, sight, taste, smell, the experience every day of sleeping and waking and dreaming. We should put dreaming there. Breath, nutrition, metabolism, environment, nature, all of this is influencing our body in every moment of our experience, of that which we call a body. The body being a verb, but the body is not a noun. Okay? It's an activity. It's not a thing. And then, of course, we have an inner life, right? Thoughts, emotions, memories, desires, imagination, creativity, introspection, intuition, higher consciousness. So what we are saying is our body is the metabolism of experience. Anything you experience immediately shifts your body. Okay, so right now, even now, sitting there, you're listening to me, the genes in your cerebral cortex are very active at the moment. And they're influencing the rest of the body. Every experience. If this was an emotional conversation, then the genes in your limbic brain will be very active. If you were scared, the genes in your reptilian brain, which cause all the activity of your brain, and then the rest of your body. Okay, any experience. So this is the worst scenario of our time, emotional disturbances. I will talk about emotions this afternoon. We'll keep that session just for that. But of course, today people have time sickness, which means they're running out of time. I should talk about time too. But they're also multitasking. Remember that you cannot multitask. It's technically impossible. Okay? In fact, that's the one thing that gets worse with practice. So if you're listening to me and checking your iPhone at the same time, you're doing neither. Okay, if you're eating and speaking to someone at the same time on the phone, you're interfering with both your communication and the eating process. Okay, that's why mindfulness has become so popular, because you should only do one thing at a time. If you think you're multitasking, you're moving from one thing to another very fast, and you're not really doing anything properly. Even your body responds to that in a way that it says, don't treat me like this. Okay, so performance anxiety, lack of concentration, confusion, this is the epidemic of our time. Lapses of memory, apathy, depression, anger, hostility, guilt, shame. We'll talk about that this afternoon. And ultimately burnout, which is most common in caregivers. So doctors, nurses, social workers, healthcare providers, nurses I mentioned, they have the highest incidence. Psychiatrists, highest incidence of depression, suicide, alcoholism is all from healthcare providers. It's a very sad situation. On GIO, by the way, we have a program for burnout for physicians as well, but anybody can use it. Okay. And then that leads to behavioral disturbances, drug and alcohol abuse, appetite disruption, sleep disturbances, aggression, hostility, fear, phobias, bad relationships, social interactions. Everything gets messed up, and ultimately it also results in disease. As I said, 95% of all disease is related to inflammation. And that includes every system in the body, from minor things like skin eruptions to autoimmune diseases, to increased risk of cancer. Everything you can think about, 95% is related to inflammation. Okay, so now we'll talk about the 6 pillars, which is what I want to talk about right now. Very practical stuff. Number 1, sleep. Sleep is the most efficient way to improve your health. From a spiritual point of view, what is sleep? Well, there's dream sleep and there's deep sleep. From a spiritual point of view, it's the dialing down of the fluctuations of consciousness. So consciousness is going on and off as body-mind and then experience of the universe. So in sleep, it's a dialing down. First the dream state, and then deep sleep, complete absence of fluctuations. That's why I say sleep is a spiritual activity. Okay, that's why in deep sleep, body removes toxins. It creates order out of chaos. It renews itself. It fine-tunes the immune system. Your memory gets better because, you know, your memories, by the way, are not stored in your brain. This is another big thing that neuroscientists are confronting. Where is memory in the brain? They can't find it. They only, if I tell you to remember something, remember what you had for dinner last night. What did you have for dinner last night, sir? Okay, chicken, vegetables, etc. Now, there was no memory of that till I asked him the question. Okay, as soon as I asked him the question, then that memory which was in his being, in his consciousness, as a possibility, became the actual neural firing in the brain. So all our memories, and tonight we are going to do something that will show to you that your memories are not in your body or your brain, they're in your soul. Okay, so that's why when we sleep and we're returning to that place that we call the soul, our memories get sharper. If you sleep well, your memories will be great. There's unconscious processing of information in deep sleep. That's why if you sleep well, you will have access to creativity. And now many studies, when students are struggling for an exam, those who sleep better and don't study through the night do better. Those who spend the whole night studying don't do so well. Okay. During the day, in certain cases, yes. But if you get 8 hours of sleep at night, then you don't need that. Unconscious processing, you solidify everything you learn, helps you think clearly, reduces the chance of weight gain, because you know why? Because during sleep, all your hormones go into self-regulation. If you have disturbed sleep, then there are hormones like ghrelin and leptin which disturb appetite and so on. And weight gain occurs because of lack of sleep. Reduces the chance of weight gain, reduces type 2 diabetes, overall risk of premature death, and of course you connect with your spirit. Okay, meditation has the same effects as sleep, but one is not a substitute for the other. They actually amplify each other. Maybe I'll talk about a few things that help you sleep better. Okay, so the first thing is activity during the day. The more active you are during the day, the better you'll sleep at night. Physical activity. Second thing is about 20 minutes of exposure to sunshine during the day. That will reset your melatonin level. So when we sleep, melatonin goes up. During the day, melatonin goes down. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates our circadian rhythms. In fact, these days, and some people manufacture what are called these circadian light bulbs. You can get them. They're microchips that go into bulbs that will mirror the circadian rhythm. Okay. You have a part of your optic nerve that responds to circadian rhythms. It's called the circadian optic nerve. And it's relatively a new discovery. So light regulates your hormones, melatonin, but everything else. So recently, people have also discovered, it's all very new by the way, I'm telling you now, that if you take a small dose, if you have sleep disturbance, if you take a very small dose of melatonin, 0.5 milligrams, there are very few people that make that, but you can find it on the internet. You can find it on Amazon if you want. 0.5, the normal dose of melatonin is 5 milligrams. So this is 1/10 the dose. It's almost homeopathic. There's one company, I believe, that makes it. It's called Pure, P-U-R-E. And, I got this information from a sleep specialist at Harvard Medical School who wanted an endorsement for his book. So, but then I checked it out. And so 0.5 milligrams will reset your biological clock before you sleep, especially if you go to sleep before 10 o'clock. Okay? Circadian lighting will do that. There are other things you can do, like you take a little bit of warm milk with a little honey. That'll do that. Tryptophan and phenylalanine get stimulated in your brain. If you have your room totally dark, 100% dark as possible, with as little noise as possible, that'll also put you to sleep because it stimulates melatonin. What else you can do? The other things you can do is, of course, meditation will help you go to sleep if you meditate during the day. And today we are discovering a lot about a phenomenon called grounding. I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. That also resets your biological clock. So there are many things you can do, even when you travel. Like I travel all the time. I don't experience jet lag because I do little things, like I'll definitely expose myself to sunlight. I'll do 10,000 steps. I do yoga, breathing, meditation. Once in a while, I'll take 0.5 milligrams of melatonin. Okay, so sleep is very important. In fact, now they say the risk of premature death, the number one risk factor is lack of sleep. Say that again? Sleep apnea is a very common disturbance, but you can try everything I've mentioned. Many people have sleep apnea because they're overweight, so weight reduction. But that weight problem itself is also due to lack of sleep. Yeah. Say that again? Yeah, all this hyperbaric oxygen, etc., for severe cases, yes. Absolutely. There's sleep labs now that study all this. But this is important, okay? Yes? If you've lost years of sleep, can you make up? Yes, the answer is yes. You make up very fast, within a few days. Okay? And you know, the contrast is amazing when you sleep well. You know, there's a kind of joyful energy in the body. Yeah, I think shift work, you have to take a break every now and then. That's why you have to change the shifts, you know. Airline pilots, nurses. It's something you have to be very aware of, and you have to take a break. And you know, institutions that are aware of that, they recycle people through different shifts. Okay. Yes. What's the best temperature? Good question. A little cooler than what we think is ideal. So 68 or just under 70. Little cooler. Okay. Then we normally, so if you're going to set your thermostat, 68, 69. Good question. There's aromatherapy you can do, you know, you can kind of make sure that you don't use your bedroom for anything other than sleep. You know, that's the most important thing. Don't watch TV. Don't even read in bed. Be careful not to use your computer before sleep. Somebody, I think, asked best time to sleep before 10 o'clock. If you sleep later and sleep in, that's okay. Some people do that on weekends. But it doesn't give you the best sleep. Okay? 10 to 6 is the best period for sleep. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Second, so that was sleep. Then these are the other pillars of well-being: meditation, stress management, movement, yoga, pranayama, emotions, nutrition, and resetting biological rhythms through various interventions, but particularly grounding, and I'll come to that in a moment. So in the last 5 years, we have collaborated with many people on how meditation and all the things that you're learning here this week, how they affect our body, okay? Yeah? Oh, you want to... This all improves physical and emotional and spiritual well-being, but it doesn't solve the big things about, old age, suffering, death, etc., which has only spiritual solutions. Can I move forward? Okay. So we've been doing some interesting studies in the last few years. These are our collaborators. UCSF, Elizabeth Blackburn, she's a Nobel laureate. She's recently moved to where we are in California. She's the head of the Salk Institute of Biology, the first woman president of the Salk Institute. She's from Australia, one of the most brilliant scientists today. She's written a book that I'll show you in a moment. And she works with Alyssa Appel, who's still at UCSF. Rudy Tanzi, who's my co-author in Super Genes and Super Brain. He's a professor at Harvard Medical School, and he's the head of genetics at Mass General Hospital, and a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. Eric Schott, who's at Mount Sinai in New York, and then me and Paul Mills at the Chopra Center in UCSD, and Sheila Patel, who's our doctor, head of the Mind-Body Clinic at Chopra Center. It all started with Elizabeth Blackburn. So I knew that she had done this work in telomerase. She had won the Nobel Prize 2009 for discovering the enzyme telomerase. Telomerase is the enzyme that regulates the length of telomeres. So think of your chromosomes. So chromosomes are where the genes are housed. And if you've seen pictures, that's the double, the staircase that you see, the double-stranded DNA. So the extension, you see the black buttons over there of the telomeres, those are called telomeres. They're extensions of the chromosomes, but they're given this name telomeres. So if your shoelaces were the chromosomes, then the buttons at the end of the shoelaces are telomeres. Telomeres regulate how long you live. And basically our genetic clock, even if we didn't die of heart attack, stroke, cancer, diabetes, at some point the genetic clock has a self-regulating mechanism for death. This is how the universe recycles itself. Everything recycles. Even plastic recycles. But energy, information, matter, consciousness, they all recycle. And so death is built into the keeping the universe fresh and keeping the universe evolving. Otherwise, we'd all be doomed to eternal senility. So the enzyme that regulates the telomere length is called telomerase. And I went to Elizabeth a few years ago. I had an introduction to meet her when she was still in UCSF. And I convinced her to come and study people at our center who were going through the course that you're going through, Seduction of Spirit. And lo and behold, in 1 week, the telomerase enzyme activity went up by 40%. This was a shock to everyone. 40% in 1 week, the same amount of time, same thing that you're doing, okay? In fact, Elizabeth wrote a book, The Telomere Effect. But at that point, we took and this was the paper. I was not an author of the paper because we did not want people to say that I influenced the study. It was as simple as that. This was done at the Chopra Center. Deepak Chopra was, so I stayed away from even though I designed the study, I was not responsible for either interpreting the study or the technicalities of assays, etc. So I was not an author of this study. But what it showed is that meditation, the reason we say vacation effects, you're also having a vacation here, right? Okay, so it's a combination. This is a retreat vacation, not a vacation in Las Vegas where you go to your room at 4 in the morning and you're basically sloshed. So this was a vacation effect at the retreat, and this paper was published, but at this time we also looked at many things. We just didn't look at telomerase. We in fact looked at the entire genome. So this is a modeling of your gene activity. Think your genes are not nouns, they're verbs, they're activities. They're going on and off, they're getting upregulated, they're getting downregulated. So the whole goal was to map out the genes that are active when you're healthy and the genes that are active when you're not healthy. And you can by now see that either genes that cause inflammation or genes that cause homeostasis, self-regulation. Now people say, why do we have inflammation in the first place? Inflammation is a protective response. So when you fall down, for example, and you get a bruise, you don't bleed to death because all that happens is inflammation. It prevents you from bleeding to death. And so inflammation is a protective response to any injury, whether it's a bacterial infection or it's a trauma of any kind. Inflammation is what protects you. Acute inflammation is a protective response. What causes disease is a low-grade inflammation, which is chronic, which you don't even know about unless you test for it. Okay? And then, of course, when you treat it, also you don't notice any difference. That's why it's such a... because the effects of low-grade inflammation are long-term. And the improvement that occurs also is not noticeable. Only when inflammation has been there for a long time that we get the disease. So that's why it's been ignored. Now think the next decade, we're actually going to focus just on inflammation. And the things we are mentioning are the things that affect inflammation, low-grade inflammation, which you can test for. There are inflammatory markers in the blood. They're called cytokines, and then C-reactive protein. There are lots of ways to measure inflammation. But anyway, Eric Schott and others basically said we want to predict models to navigate between disease and states of well-being. So we can look at the genes and say, this person is at risk, this person we should be able to prevent. The future of well-being is precise, predictable, preventable, and requires your participation. And it's also reversible, many diseases, including, we knew for many years now that coronary artery disease is reversible. We didn't know that of bronchial asthma and autoimmune illnesses and arthritis, but now, and even some types of cancer that are affected, but now we're getting there. So this is what Eric Schott was assigned, and ultimately this paper was published, and this is a summary of that paper. So all the genes that cause self-regulation or well-being, went up in this 1 week of the course you're in. Your genes are going up, the ones in their activity, the ones that cause self-regulation, just meditation alone. Okay? And all the genes, so some of the genes went up, the ones that increase well-being went up 17-fold. There's no drug that in the world that will change your gene activity 17 times over baseline. And all the genes that cause inflammation and therefore susceptibility to disease, particularly genes involved in heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, they went down drastically. And when Eric Schott, who's the professor at Mount Sinai, he presented this at a science conference that we had to show these results, somebody in the audience asked Dr. Schott, he said, they said, Dr. Schott, do you meditate? And he said, no. Then somebody else asked him, are you planning to? He said, no. He said, but you just showed us your research. He said, yeah, I'm going to figure out how to make a drug out of this. That's how scientists think. So what they're doing now is looking at these metabolic pathways to see how we can figure out how to make a drug. You know, you can see he's not part of our tribe, but he's a good scientist. And therefore, in that sense, he's part of our tribe. We need scientists like that. Okay, so this is what epigenetics is. Epigenetics, and there are very precise mechanisms by which these genes go up and by which they go down. Okay, so there are things, there are chemical reactions like DNA methylation, which will make the genes go on and off. Think of your genes as these light bulbs. So, you know, I can have a switch that switches on some of these lights and switches off some of these lights. Or you can have dimmers. So some of the genes go up in their activity and some go down. Okay, and there are precise mechanisms. These are called markers of gene activity. Histone modification, microRNA alterations. You don't need to know all this, but it all is very precise mapping. In fact, today, one of the biggest endeavors in genetics is, of course, epigenetics, and people are trying to figure out what they call the Epigenetic Roadmap for the future. Because, you know, when we deciphered the gene in 2000, President Clinton made the statement, we know the alphabet of life, all of which was true, but you know, everybody thought now that we know what genes cause what disease, we'll be able to cure all disease, and we didn't, because it wasn't the genes, it was their activity, which is regulated by how we live our life. Lifestyle, environment, drugs, even the environment in the womb, childhood, all this affects gene activity. Again, very technical, but that's your DNA. It's wrapped around these proteins called histones. That's the epigenetic. And these proteins fold in. Think of, like a mala around, you know what a mala is, right? Beads. Beads on a string, and that's your genes, and they are wrapped around these proteins called histones, which are the blue balls. And every experience you have is constantly modulating the shape of those proteins. So either they're close together or they're far apart, and then that regulates the marks on the genes. Very fascinating when you begin to understand this. Okay, carry that a little further. There's a nerve that goes from your brain, from your midbrain. And this, remember when I said a baby looks at its mother, friendly, not friendly, etc., voice. So this is a nerve that regulates all this. It's called the vagus nerve. In Latin, vagus nerve, and it's related to the English word vagabond. This is the most important nerve in your body for healing. It comes from your midbrain. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It influences microcirculation in your face. So when you're happy and relaxed, you have a different expression and different blood flow in the brain. What we're trying to do with our Gio app soon, we'll have, you can take your own selfie, except we're not calling it a selfie, but a welfie. And then you'll be able to keep a record of your welfies, and the computer program will analyze your well-being. You can look at that microcirculation, and then you can say that this person has normal blood pressure or whatever inflammation through algorithms. This is happening in the next couple of years, okay? So that's why use the app for now. It also will have voice recognition because the vagus nerve influences the tone of your voice. So if you're stressed, once we have a baseline of your voice and a baseline of your welfie or selfie or whatever you want to call it, then tracking the tone of your voice through a computer-generated program and the algorithms, one can tell the state of your well-being. Stress, not stress, happy, not happy, etc. All these programs are already available, but they haven't yet come out in a big way. They're available to research labs, but these are going to come out very soon. Okay, so the vagus nerve, which goes from your brain, midbrain, regulates your facial expressions, which are basically a projection of how you're feeling. Once we have your baseline, then we can see, predict even. Inflammation, self-regulation, blood pressure, inflammatory markers, all through algorithms. Facial expression, tone of voice. Intuitively, you probably know this. If somebody has a hangover, you can tell on the phone. I can. Okay, if they haven't slept well, I can tell. If they are stressed, I can tell just by, but soon all this technology helps us. Okay, so from your brain, facial expressions, tone of voice, and then it goes to your heart, where it regulates what is called heart rate variability. So for those of you who are kind of in this field, you know that there are two systems that we have and that we call part of the autonomic nervous system. One is the sympathetic nervous system, which alerts us to fight or flight. So when you're stressed, your sympathetic system is in overdrive. We can say actually the sympathetic nervous system of the entire world is on overdrive right now. Stress, inflammation. But when you are practicing yoga, or when you're practicing meditation, or when you have healthy emotions, or when you have slept well, you have the opposite. The vagus nerve gets stimulated. And that influences, as I said, amongst other things, your facial expressions, tone of voice, and your heart rate variability. So if a person is stressed, then they have a very fixed RR interval in their EKG, which means heartbeat to heartbeat, there's no variation. It's like a marching army going to war. Boom, 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 boom. But when you're relaxed and happy and feeling kind of flow, then vagus nerve, from beat to beat, there's variation. You're going with the flow, so to speak. Okay? So the higher your heart rate variability, the healthier you are. And it's very easy. All you have to do is an EKG to see that. And today, you don't need a 12-lead EKG to do that. You can do it on your phone. You can get all these apps, which we're going to incorporate through all this, also with voice recognition. But you can just basically, take your thumb, put it where the phone, the camera is, and it'll look at your heart rate variability. It'll send it to a computer. We get an instant analysis. And soon you won't even have to do that. The device itself, your phone will do it for you. In fact, I met with people from Apple and all these people. They're very excited right now as the next thing they want to do with their phones and devices and so on. So heart rate variability is influenced by your vagus nerve. I'm spending a little time on this because when you do yoga, you stimulate the vagus nerve. Especially when you do sun salutation, when you do cat-cow, I'm sure you've been doing all this every day, that stimulates the vagus nerve. Okay, and it basically overrides the sympathetic nervous system. But everything we're talking about stimulates the vagus nerve. Yoga most dramatically, pranayama most dramatically and immediately, meditation most dramatically and immediately, sleep, etc. Yes? Yes, lot of studies on heart rate variability. Lots. Say it a little louder. Telomerase. Has that been done? Yeah, it goes away. That effect goes away. Yeah, you have to be doing it to keep it up. Okay, so your vagus nerve is stimulated. I met, and I can say this publicly now because, I've met with the R&D people of big pharmaceutical companies who are now very nervous about the future because, all you have to do is see, you have to see a commercial. Yeah, all you have to do is see a commercial on any drug, right? You have these people, they're playing tennis, they're making love, there's beautiful music in the background, and they say, ask your doctor about this. But then while they're saying all that, in the background, they're saying it could cause sexual impotence and it could cause death. And then in between, in the commercial, they tell you everything else. Why would you take something like that? But then people go ask their doctors and they prescribe those drugs. I'm not saying all drugs are useless, but 85% of drugs are of optional or marginal benefit. Drugs are useful in acute situations. You have a massive infection, you might need the appropriate antibiotic at that moment. But when it comes to these chronic things, drugs don't work in the long term. So heart rate variability, but then the vagus nerve goes through your diaphragm and it goes to your gut, where it influences the activity of your microbiome. And if you're feeling happy, relaxed, joyful, not stressed, the microbiome in turn puts out things like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, all these neuropeptides, because they're all made by genes, and that sends messages back to your brain, which then influences your mood, the clarity of your thinking, and everything else. It's a very intricate and beautiful setup that nature has designed for us. So the reason I mentioned the drug companies now know that in the future, either they go to a completely different model of drugs, which is not this usual three-dimensional molecule that interferes with the receptor site, but something like what Eric Schott was saying, that mirrors the body's pathways. And they are going to do that too, and I think that's a good area of research. But one of the things that some of the drug companies are working on is accidentally somebody noticed that if you put an electrical implant in the vagus nerve in people who have intractable epilepsy, it's the only condition for which the FDA in the US approves electrical implants in the vagus. So if somebody has really bad epilepsy that's not responding to drugs, you put an electrical implant and then you stimulate that implant through a device such as your iPhone or whatever, you can do that, then the epilepsy is manageable. But what they found accidentally was when they were stimulating the vagus nerve, people who had asthma, they got better. The asthma disappeared. And some people who had autoimmune illnesses got better. So, then they started experimenting, and they found that every time you stimulate the vagus nerve, inflammation goes down. Okay, so now actually I met one of them, for the biggest company in the world, and he said, would you help us with all these pathways of these different nerves, particularly the vagus nerve? I said, we can stimulate that by meditation, yoga, breathing. He said, I know that, but how do we make money out of that? So I said, let me think about it. And I said, if you support this research, then for the severe cases, we can help you put implants, but not electrical implants, magnetic implants. So you can put a magnetic implant somewhere here, and then you can stimulate it, and it's not invasive, and it doesn't hurt. So for severe cases, we could do that, but for very severe cases, for the other cases, meditation, yoga, breathing, good enough. He said, let me think about it, never called me back. But now if you go to New York and you look at the R&D departments of these people, they're spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on what they call bioelectrical medicine. In fact, the article I just wrote for Chronicle on inflammation, the guy who's co-authored it, he's the head of bioelectric medicine at Karolinska Institute. But he understands that this is not the way. But he's doing the research on bioelectrical medicine because we can figure out the metabolic pathways. Okay, so it goes to your gut. This is a very neat system. And your mind, body, emotions, biochemistry, all of that is closely linked. This is another study we published recently, which shows the effect of gratitude. So we had people keep a journal, and these are non-meditators. These are people with chronic heart failure, actually. This is a study done on patients with chronic congestive heart failure, for which people have to use digoxin and diuretics and everything. So these people kept a gratitude journal at night. Before they slept, they would write down, I am grateful for. All their inflammatory markers went down. And in many cases, their condition improved to the point where they could either decrease their medication or even get rid of it. Now, who would have thought that 10 years ago? That gratitude changes your biology in such a dramatic fashion. This study was published by Columbia University, a journal there. And then this is another study that I did co-author as the senior author, which shows a 1-week program where we added a diet, plant-based diet mostly, and some Ayurvedic herbs, and then we also added panchakarma, which is a little detox process as part of a protocol that we call Self-Directed Biological Transformation Initiative, SPTI. And this was published in Nature, which is the highest impact journal, Nature Scientific Reports, where we were able to show that every metabolite in the body is altered through the lifestyle that we're talking about here, the 6 pillars of well-being. And this is actually very difficult to do because you're measuring trillions of bits of data. It takes many people to do that. It takes many computers to analyze that. But now we have the first paper showing that you can change your biology in a week, completely and totally. We said gratitude, And now we are looking at something called biofield medicine and biofield science, which is looking at the electrical field. When you do an EKG, when you do an EEG, you're measuring the electrical activity of the heart and the brain, but your whole body does that too. So we're looking at biofields in people who are healthy and that not that healthy, and this is the next frontier. You'll be able to look at a biofield and predict what's happening, what is not happening. These are theoretical papers, but they're all published. Okay, and our studies with the bioelectrical activity of the heart and the brain were with the Scripps. And what did they show? These are also published studies in Frontiers of Human Neuroscience. Basically, that your brain and your nervous system changes its activity within seconds of starting the meditation.